Thank you for joining us for CBN News Watch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Israel putting the release of Palestinian prisoners on hold as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying Hamas must stop humiliating Israeli hostages when they're being released. This development coming as the Israeli military goes after terrorists in the West Bank following last week's attempted terrorist attack using Israeli buses. On the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the international leaders are coming to the White House to talk to President Donald Trump about what to do next, as faith leaders in that country say they want protections for religious freedom. The forgotten victims of the wars in Israel, wild animals. We're going to show you how they've been hurt and who's caring for them, and how CBN Superbook is spreading the gospel to children and to families. All those stories and more today on CBN News Watch.
This is CBN News Watch.
It is Monday. We are going to begin in Israel, where the government is holding up the release of more Palestinian prisoners. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu demanding Hamas end the humiliating transfer ceremonies in Gaza. The move coming as Hamas let 6 more hostages go over the weekend, and the Israeli military sending tanks to the West Bank to fight the growing terrorist threat from that area. Julie Stahl brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Israel put the release of some 600 Palestinian prisoners on hold to protest Hamas's brutal murders of hostage Shiri Bibas and her children, Ariel and Kfir, whose bodies were returned last week. Israel is also protesting the terror group's humiliation of hostages at staged handover ceremonies in Gaza. The latest outrage is a Hamas propaganda video showing 2 hostages who were brought to Saturday's release of 6 other hostages, but then were taken back into captivity. In the Knesset, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held up photos of the slain Bibases and asked Israeli lawmakers to never forget.
This photo says it all, and I ask you will engrave it on your heart, to always remember what we are fighting against and against who we are fighting.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio wrote on X, Hamas's treatment of hostages, including its brutal murder of the Bibas family, further illustrates their savagery and is yet another reason why we are saying these terrorists must release all of the hostages immediately or be destroyed. Critics are also ripping into the Associated Press for how it's framing the Bibas killings. Democrat lawmaker Richie Torres said on X, the AP chooses to whitewash the baby killers, calling them militants rather than terrorists, and claiming the children died rather than were murdered in captivity. Disgraceful. Republican Senator Mike Lee wrote, Hamas murdered these hostages. They didn't just die in captivity, as if by natural causes. Why does AP want to sugarcoat this? President Trump weighed in after the latest freeing of 6 more hostages this past weekend.
But they're coming back in pretty bad shape. It's a horrible thing, and many are dead. Many are dead. So we'll see how that all ends up.
There's talk of extending Phase 1 of the ceasefire deal to get more hostages freed as soon as possible. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff told CNN that talks for a Phase 2 are expected this week.
We do expect it, Jake, to go forward. We have to get an extension of Phase 1.
But Trump's national security advisor said on Fox News that Hamas is threatening all by its horrifying actions.
This behavior over this last week with these children, with how these people have been released, this propaganda absolutely is affecting the prospects of negotiations.
Meanwhile, after thwarting last week's terror plot to blow up at least 15 Israeli buses, the IDF is ramping up efforts to destroy the growing terror threat from Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank.
For the first time in decades, in Judea and Samaria, tanks have entered. This means one thing. We fight terrorism by all means and everywhere.
On another front, Israeli military jets flew over the funeral of former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut. The same day, the IDF also released video of the massive Israeli airstrike that killed Nasrallah back in September. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Today marks 3 years since Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine. The anniversary comes as the leaders of France and Britain head to Washington to urge President Donald Trump not to abandon Ukraine. CBN's Dale Hurd is on the story.
Russia marked the third anniversary of its war with Ukraine by launching its biggest ever drone strike on Kyiv over the weekend. President Zelensky has also been under fire from the White House, with President Trump calling him a dictator and blaming him for Russia's invasion. Zelensky told reporters he would step down if it stopped the fighting.
You're under pressure from Moscow to step aside and Washington to hold elections. Would you be willing to give up the presidency if it meant peace for Ukraine?
Zelensky said he would, and that he'd also give up the presidency if it meant Ukraine could join NATO. Democratic Senator Jack Reed condemned what he calls President Trump's alignment with Russia.
This is just someone who admires Putin, does not believe in the struggle of the Ukrainians, and is committed to cozying up to an autocrat.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defended President Trump's stance.
The reality is the president is focused on one thing and one thing only, and that's stopping the killing and the destruction across Ukraine and ensuring an enduring peace. So standing here and saying, you're good, you're bad, you're a dictator, you're not a dictator, you invaded, you didn't, it's not useful, it's not productive.
Meanwhile, a dozen leaders from Europe and Canada are visiting Ukraine's capital on the war's anniversary to show their support to Zelensky. Here at home, the White House is continuing to take the axe to the federal government, this time at the Pentagon. Dismissing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Air Force General C.Q. Brown Jr., Trump also fired the Navy's top officer, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, and 6 3- and 4-star generals. Trump wants to replace Brown with Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Raisin Kane. Hegseth defended the move.
The president deserves to pick his key national security and military advisory team. There are lots of presidents who've made changes, from FDR to Eisenhower to H.W. Bush to Barack Obama, who fired or dismissed hundreds of militaries during his term.
When the French and British leaders visit the White House this week, they'll be pitching a plan for Ukraine that would call for 300,000 peacekeepers, with U.S. troops as a backstop. In previous comments, Trump has opposed any U.S. military involvement. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Ukraine's faith leaders share President Zelensky's view Russia is not to be trusted. They also want a just peace, which includes protection for religious freedom. CBN's Brody Carter brings us that story.
While the meeting in Saudi Arabia laid the foundation for negotiating a peace deal, Mission Eurasia warns that Russia has specifically targeted Ukrainian pastors and churches in its report, Faith Under Russian Terror.
Whatever you see in that report, and that's hundreds of churches seized, destroyed, pastors arrested, there is no room for any other faith-based organization or church except the Russian Orthodox Church. It's critical to pay attention to it.
After 3 years of war, Ukrainian evangelical leaders like Mission Eurasia President Sergei Rakuba remain steadfast in urging Americans to support Ukraine. One pastor tells CBN News while the war has tested the faith of many, it's also made it stronger.
Many Christians realized that their faith was not as strong as they thought. We lost part of our members. They leave country, but another part understand that their faiths are growing during these problems. Many people understand that Christ is real today.
Pastor Dmytro Kolesnik of Lviv's Hosanna Baptist Church calls for a just peace, one that protects freedom, faith, and sovereignty. He credits American churches for helping Ukrainian congregations survive the war, grateful he's still able to freely worship God without fear or persecution.
The same Russian Orthodox Church, they are prohibited, but it's not about religious persecutions. Sorry, we have unity, we have peace between our confessions, and we have big freedom in our country, big religious freedom.
In addition to this persecution, the sense of betrayal here runs deep. This stems from Russia's violation of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which led to Ukraine giving up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for assurances of territorial integrity and political independence. Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea broke that deal and casts a shadow over whatever peace agreement might result from U.S.-led talks.
Ukrainians are expecting a lot more from the U.S. so that our country is not used as a bargaining chip, but there is a people, there are 40 million lives. And if we don't defend them as we promised, if we don't help them in their fight for their freedom and sovereignty, of course, Putin will not stop at any of this so-called peace talks.
The Saudi Arabia talks also included a potential summit between Presidents Trump and Putin. While the outcome of that negotiation remains uncertain, Ukraine's evangelicals maintain their unwavering faith in God remains strong. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Coming up, we're going to go back to Israel to look at the forgotten victims of the wars there. Wild animals were hurt by forest fires, oil spills, and shrapnel. We're going to introduce you to the people who are nursing them back to health. We've got that story for you when we come back. You are watching CBN NewsWatch. Israel and its people have endured great suffering over 500 days of war. The missile attacks and resulting fires have also taken a toll on the country's forest and wildlife. Now, a park that's attracted bird watchers from around the world is taking a big step to reclaim its mission. Here again is CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl.
Less than 20 miles from the Lebanese border, Agamon Hahula Park is known as a bird watcher's paradise. In good times, the Hula Valley can host millions of migrating birds and thousands of visitors each year. Closed since October 2023, it's been very quiet, with no statistics on how the war affected the bird migration. Now things are looking up. After more than a year of being closed due to the war, missiles, and forest fires, the Agamon Hula Park is now ready to reopen and welcome visitors from around Israel and around the world.
It symbolizes the rehabilitation of the north of Israel and coming back home of the citizens that supposed to left in the middle of the night 1 year ago.
Ifat Ovadia Lusky of the KKL Jewish National Fund oversees Israel's forests and is helping to rebuild communities here. She says although northern Israel has never experienced anything like this, hope is strong.
We have the evacuees people and the fires, and this site was closed more than a year. It means that thousands of visitors couldn't come to here.
CBN News joined a tour of the affected areas recently. The park's visitors center contains interactive exhibits, and there is an option to walk or tour the grounds in a vehicle. The war throughout northern Israel damaged around 5,000 acres of forests.
We had a lot of streams and springs, aquatic environments that were polluted, and open areas that were polluted by oil and benzene from the army vehicles. In the forest that was burned, we saw that animals were hurt.
Chief scientist Dr. Doron Markel says, although they don't know how the birds handled the war overall, the cranes seem to be doing well.
There are thousands of cranes wintering here as usual, and even more than last year. So the nature wins it all.
Itamar Katz, head forester of the Golan Heights, says the war has kept his crews busy.
More than a third of all of our forests burned. If we talk about open areas, we're talking 4 times what I just said.
Sadly, the biggest culprit behind the forest fires, he says, has been Israel's interceptor rockets.
They created so many fires. I mean, they saved countless amounts of lives. But if we were used to getting one rocket fall in one forest and start one fire, then you had 3 or 4 interceptors, which started 20 or 30 spot fires. It was a very different situation.
Often preventing them from doing their job.
We weren't always allowed to go to the fire at the end of the day. And sometimes we were just told, listen, it's too dangerous, it's too close to the border. And we just needed to let it burn.
Head veterinarian Rona Nadler-Valenci started to treat animal patients primarily injured by human presence when the Agamon Wildlife Rehabilitation Center opened about 5 years ago.
So it can be road traffic accidents, and it can be collision with power lines. It can be poison from agriculture or from various other things. It can also be gunshot wounds. We take in patients that have been injured, and we nurse them and rehabilitate them back and release them to nature.
Before the war, the center had been growing.
And then the war kicked in, and we had to learn how to work in a very different reality. So in the beginning, all of our staff, including myself, we had to evacuate because we're all from here, from the Galilee.
Thus, the center had to close.
In fact, we had to release all of the animals and hope for the best. But eventually, we just came back because we really needed to be here for the animals.
When it reopened, they didn't see many patients because there were no people to bring in the animals. Only soldiers in the war zones found them.
We saw a lot of injuries that are related to the war. So if it would be collisions with army vehicles or animals entrapped in fire zones.
Now KKL Jewish National Fund is shifting gears, looking toward the future. Valenci says they hope to build a new animal hospital.
A new hospital so that we can have an impact, a greater impact, and take in more patients and treat more animals every year and release them back to nature.
Markle told CBN News reopening the visitor center is an important step.
It can be a day of change, a day that we will start the reclamation and rehabilitation, not only of people, but also the nature. The key here is to study before you do, and when you do it better. We call it Build Back Better.
Julie Stahl, Agamon Hahula Park, Northern Israel.
Still ahead, spreading the gospel around the world to children through CBN Superbook. We're going to show you how the show is having an impact in one country, Japan, right after this. The original Superbook first hit Japan's airwaves in 1981. Since its debut and its success, CBN televised an updated animated Bible series reaching a new generation of Japanese children. Asia correspondent Lucille Toulousan shows us Superbook's impact on the life of one young viewer and his single mom.
At 5 years old, Eisuke first watched Superbook at the Nozomi Christian Preschool in 2018, the year the new version aired in Japan.
I really like Superbook because I can relate with Chris. In the story of David, at first, Chris was afraid of the big crowd, but when he played his guitar for God, he won the audition. In my case, I was not good in origami, and some kids told me to just quit. But I did not give up, and God helped me. Now, I am good at it. I asked my mom to buy the DVDs for me, but she said to just watch on television because she did not have extra money.
Back then, Eisuke's mother, Dieko, struggled financially as a single parent.
When he sees other families in his school and the children go to their fathers, he asks why he doesn't have that kind of family. I apologize to him, and he tells me it's not my fault. He just asks God why.
Watching the program together, mother and son are learning many life lessons.
Superbook has made it easier for us to understand the Word of God and grow in our faith. Eisuke told me he realized that God allowed our situation to know Him more, and by watching Superbook, he learned how much God loves him.
Before watching Superbook, I know there is a God, but I am not sure if I should believe Jesus. But through Superbook, I learned that Jesus died on the cross and forgave my sins, so I can go to heaven.
God granted Eisuke's desire for his own DVDs. He won the Superbooks quiz contest and got the Season 1 set as his prize. His mom encouraged him to make a Superbook album, which also serves as his journal.
After I got my prize, I submitted my testimony of gratitude.
Dieko has her testimony as well.
When Aske was born, I did not have faith in God. But when we went to the Christian preschool, we came to know God. I learned about Jesus and I accepted Jesus Christ. I discovered my purpose too, and now I am a licensed teacher in the same preschool.
And because mom and son are big Superbook fans, they have completed all 5 seasons of Superbook DVDs. We visited SK in his home to take a look at his complete set of DVDs of Superbook and to also give him some surprise gifts from Superbook. Konnichiwa! Hi! Hello! I heard that you have a complete set of DVDs? Yes? Aske proudly showed us his sets of DVDs. After that, we gave him Superbook souvenirs and we saw how they really meant a lot to him. You like it? Are you happy?
Happy!
Happy! Happy! Lucille Talusan, CBN News, Kawagoe, Japan.
We'll be right back with an encouraging word for your day. Stay with us. You're watching CBN NewsWatch. Time now for your Monday Motivation, and today I want to leave you with this thought as we begin another week together. Mustard seed faith is mountain-moving faith. A little faith in a big God is all you need. He's giving you the exact measure of faith you need, but your faith is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the bigger it gets. Put that mustard seed faith to work today and watch your big God move mountains. There's no mountain greater than His hand at work on your behalf. That will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can always find more of CBN News on the CBN News channel or online at cbnnews.com. Thank you so much for watching today. We look forward to seeing you right back here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye, God bless, and thank you.